un altro grande amico, Nazioni Unite, hanno organizzato un anno della gioventù. Loro hanno organizzato, hanno annunciato, noi abbiamo fatto.
No pope has connected with young people quite like John Paul II. In 1984, 6 years after his election, Pope John Paul asked young people to gather in Rome. More than 300,000 accepted his invitation, and World Youth Day was born. Since then, there have been World Youth Days in Argentina, Spain, Poland, the USA, the Philippines, France, Canada, and Italy.
Vi faccio una benedizione. Siete bravi, siete buoni. Mi piace essere con voi.
John Paul II not only set time aside for young people abroad, but at home as well. He'd often open the doors of the Vatican to have special gatherings, like this one in the Cortile di San Damaso. His message was clear: live a life of chastity, don't take drugs, and strive to become saints. An appeal he repeated in 2000, with nearly 2 million people gathered in Rome to meet him.
Se tu vivi con I giovani, tu dovrai diventare anche giovane.
Saint John Paul II. We now begin with the memories of Pope John Paul II.
The servant of God, John Paul II, will be beatified by Pope Benedict XVI on May 1st in Rome. Born in Poland on May 18, 1920, John Paul II was the first non-Italian pope in more than 400 years. His pontificate lasted 26 years and was the third longest in the history of the Catholic Church. He was dubbed the Pilgrim Pope for his non-stop travels to bring the message of Christ to 129 countries. Considered one of the most influential leaders of the 20th century, he played a decisive role in the fall of communism in Poland, and many saw him as influential in the fall of the Berlin Wall. He worked tirelessly to improve relations between the Church and Judaism, Islam, the Orthodox, and the Anglican Church. He survived an assassination attempt on May 13, 1981, the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, when a Turkish gunman fired on the pontiff as he passed by in St. Peter's Square. Pope John Paul II began World Youth Day in 1985, and he declared the year 2000 to be the Great Jubilee. He raised more men and women to the altar than all of his predecessors combined. He had a great love for Latin America and called it the continent of hope. John Paul II expressed great love for the Virgin Mary through diverse advocations such as Czestochowa, Fatima, and Guadalupe. He died a holy death on April 2, 2005, just after reaching the age of 84. Thousands attended his funeral to pay their last respects. Soon-to-be blessed John Paul II has been named the patron of World Youth Day.
Karol Joseph Wojtyla was elected Pope 16th of October 1978. Pope John Paul II was the first native of Poland to be made pontiff. Pope John Paul was the first non-Italian to be elected Pope since Pope Hadrian VI, the year 1522 to 1523. Let's go to this event of the election of Pope John Paul II. Habemus Papam.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum. Habemus Papam. Eminentissimum ac reverendissimum Dominum Carolum, Sancte Romane Ecclesiae, Cardinalem Wojtyła.
Sia lodato Gesù Cristo.
Sempre sia lodato.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle, siamo ancora tutti addolorati dopo la morte dell'amatissimo Papa Giovanni Paolo I. Gli eventissimi cardinali hanno chiamato un nuovo vescovo di Roma. Lo hanno chiamato di un paese
lontano. Lontano ma sempre così vicino per la comunione nella fede e nella tradizione cristiana. Io ho avuto paura di ricevere questa nomina, ma ho fatto nel spirito dell'ubbidienza verso il nostro Signore e nella fiducia totale alla sua madre, Madonna Santissima. Anche non so se potrei bene spiegarmi nella la nostra lingua italiana, se mi sbaglio. Se mi sbaglio mi corrigerete. E così mi presento a voi tutti per confessare la nostra fede comune, la nostra speranza, la nostra fiducia alla Madre di Cristo e della Chiesa e anche a incominciare da nuovo su quella strada, della storia e della Chiesa, di incominciare con aiuto di Dio e con aiuto degli uomini.
We are about to witness and share in the spiritual and physical journey of a young man from Poland. He is destined to become the most beloved Pope of our lifetime. His life and role made him as the greatest spiritual leader of the world. Now let us allow Pope John Paul II to enter our hearts as he continues to share his thoughts, his philosophies, his messages in his life and journeys. Let's go to the 7 key points that made John Paul II the great Pope.
Soon the smiling image of John Paul II will once again adorn St. Peter's Square. He will officially be recognized as a saint of the Church, making him an example for Catholics around the world. But in his 26-year pontificate, it can be easy to overlook some of the key points that marked his life and his papacy. So here are a few examples. Humanity. Karol Wojtyła was passionate about life and the arts. He loved poetry and drama, and in fact, he used to be an actor himself and wrote a play before he was ordained a priest. A key moment in his life was when he was employed in a chemical factory.
questa esperienza di un operaio e nello stesso tempo di un seminarista clandestino, mi è rimasta per tutta la vita. Nella fabbrica per fare il mio turno, 8 ore di giorno o di notte. Ho portato con alcuni libri. I miei colleghi, vuol dire gli operai, si sono meravigliati un po', ma non scandalizzati.
He was a pope everybody felt close to. He loved to laugh and wasn't afraid to show it. He was also known for hugging people. He wasn't afraid. He was a man of deep faith who put his trust in God. He prepared for the priesthood at a clandestine seminary founded by the then Cardinal of Krakow. And because of the tense atmosphere, he was ordained in secret. He always challenged everyone to not be afraid of life's difficulties.
Non abbiate paura.
He never denied his health problems. In fact, he would even joke about them every now and then.
Come vedete è un papa un po' deficiente ma non ancora decaduto.
He underlined the importance of conscience instead of hatred, and this, he said, was the best way to counteract materialism. He chose understanding as a path towards democracy. The traveling pope. John Paul II was the pope and world leader who traveled the most in history. He visited 129 countries. He took on a total of 146 trips outside of Italy, which adds up to the equivalent of 3 times the distance between the Earth and the Moon. And during his journeys, he welcomed meetings with different types of people.
Los mineros queremos que se ponga este casco. Y sea un trabajador minero más de Catavi. Creemos en Dios Padre Santo.
His first trip was to Mexico, a country he fell in love with immediately. His last trip was in August 2004, when he traveled to the Lourdes Shrine in the south of France. He died 8 months later. He asked for forgiveness. During the Jubilee in the year 2000, John Paul II asked for forgiveness for the Church's sins. From the Crusades, the Inquisition, divisions within the Church, the persecution of Jews, racism, and social injustice. He even personally forgave Ali Aka, the man who tried to kill him in St. Peter's Square on May 13, 1981. Accessible saints. John Paul II is also remembered for naming saints different cultures could relate to. During his pontificate, he beatified 1,340 people and canonized 483. That number alone is more than the combined canonizations carried out by his predecessors. Among the saints he proclaimed are parents like Gianna Beretta, indigenous people such as Juan Diego and Catherine Tecahuita. There's also the charismatic Padre Pio, the beatification of Mother Teresa, and Pope John XXIII. Youth. His genuine attitude triggered an instant connection with young people. He suggested they gather together every 2 or 3 years. And that was the beginning of World Youth Day. The first meeting outside of Rome was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, back in 1987. It's from these gatherings that some of the most moving images of his pontificate were shown to the world. Dialogue with religions. John Paul II built bridges between everyone, even those who didn't share his point of view. He was the first pope to visit a synagogue and address the Jewish community as our older brothers.
Siete i nostri fratelli prediletti e in un certo modo si potrebbe dire i nostri fratelli maggiori.
He also visited a mosque in Syria where the tomb of St. John the Baptist is located. He also improved the church's relationship with Orthodox, Anglican, and Protestant Christians. He summoned the leaders of all world religions to pray together for peace. John Paul II has gone down in history for many reasons, and it's no wonder that many already call him John Paul II the Great.
Karol Joseph Wojtyla was born in Wadowice, in the industrial town of Padovici on May 18, 1920. Carol was the second of two sons born to Carol Wojtyla and Emilia Karorowska. His mother died when he was 9 years old. You can see in this photo, the boy Carol Wojtyla was seen with his mother shortly before her death in 1929. Young Carol wears the military uniform of the Wadowice Military School, the same school of his older brother Edmond attended. Let's go to the early years of Carol. He said in his diary, I had not yet made my first communion when I lost my mother. I was almost 9 years old. I was almost 9 years old. I do not have a clear awareness of her contribution, which must have been great to my religious training. After her death, and later, the death of my older brother, I was left alone with my father, a deeply religious man. Carol was raised by his father, a retired military officer. Carol had a special relationship with his father, which deepened after the death of his mother in 1929. But his father died when he was 21 years old. You can see the picture of Carol Joseph Wojtyla at the age of 1 year old in this photo. He wrote in his diary, sometimes I would wake up during the night and find my father on his knees, just as I would always see him in the parish church. We never spoke about a vocation to the priesthood, but his example was in a way my first seminary, a kind of domestic seminary. You can see the picture of young Carol with his father, Carol Sr. Years later, John Paul II would describe his father by saying, by profession, he was a soldier. And after my mother's death, his life would become one of my constant prayer. A brooding, you can see a picture, in this picture, a brooding little boy Carol seen with his father and extended family. After the death of his mother and brother Edmond, young Carol was, in his words, a motherless only child. At the age of 21, Carol was totally orphan. His eldest brother Edmond, a doctor, died when he was 12 years old. Carol made his first communion at the age of 9 and was confirmed at the age of 18. Carol, the age of 9, you can see in this photo, in a traditional photographic pose to commemorate making his first Holy Communion in 1929. Year 1926 to 1931, Carol had his elementary school in Wadowice. You can see the photo of Carol. Carol was considered an excellent student before favored literature and drama over history and science. Although Carol, you can see seated on the second from left, served already as an altar boy at the church in Wadowice. He attended a non-secular prep school called a gymnasium, even though two other local gymnasiums were run by the Catholic Church there. See the photo of the close cropped hair of the young boy Carol is an influence of his father's military experience. 1932 to 1938, Carol graduated with Diploma of Maturity. 1938 to 1942, Carol studied at the Faculty of Philosophy Department at Philology at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. In 1938, Carol moved to Krakow to continue his pursuit of arts. In 1938, Carol studied the Polish literature at the Jagiellonian University. He developed a love of poetry. He wrote poems. He became a member of the Rhapsody Theater in Krakow. You can see in this photo, young man Carl Wojtyla appearing in a 1935 theater production entitled Promises of a Wedding with his childhood friend Halina Krokisbits. In 1938, the festival, you can see here again the photo of Carol during the festival of Krakow featuring a young Carl Wojtyla starring in a play, The Night of the Moon, serving his country. With World War II on the horizon, the man who will be the future Holy Father goes through basic training with other healthy men his age. He learns how to use rifle. He prepares to defend his homeland from the greatest terror it has ever faced. 1941 to 1942, Carol worked as a miner in the quarry in Czechoslovakia. Yet, he wrote, thoughts that he had a vocation to be a priest were very much in his mind even then. 1941 to 1942, you can see the photo of Carol shirtless, worked as a factory, worked as a worker in a chemical plant of Solvay in Krakow. Here you see the photo of Carol. He is described as a friendly but keeps to himself. It is 2 months before the war breaks out. Here you see in a work photo of Carol in a war-torn Europe, Carl Wojtyla found his religious calling. While working as a laborer at a quarry, Carol watches in horror as one of his fellow laborers is blown up in a mining incident. Carol initiated this course of theological studies in a clandestinely arranged seminary in Cardinal Sapeha's palace. He was politically involved in the underground activities against the Nazis. 1945 to 1948, Carol was accepted into the major theological seminary opened after the war in 1945. You can see here the picture of Carol. Carol is an outstanding seminary student and quickly rises up to the top of his class. November 1st, 1946, Carol was ordained priest for the Archdiocese of Krakow at the age of 26. 1946 to 1948, he further studies at the Angelicum University in Rome. Carol stayed for 2 years at the Belgian College in Brussels. And here you can see the photo of Carol. Carol was one of the many young men who secretly studied for the priesthood in an occupied Poland. 1946 to 1948, he earned the doctoral degree in philosophy, PhD, with a dissertation, The Virtue of Faith in the Works of Saint John of the Cross. When he presents his thesis on the faith of Saint John of the Cross, you can see the thesis on the right, for evaluation, he receives the maximum votes, grades of approval for it. Soon, Father Wotila is working in parishes and ministering to his friends in neighboring parish. They describe him as a very good listener and a very good confessor who did not lecture penitence. Fall of 1948, Father Carol now returned to Poland and enrolled at the Faculty of Theology at the Jagiellon University in Krakow. June 1949, Father Carol presented his extended doctoral dissertation on the problem of the faith in the works of Saint John of the Cross. June 1949, he was awarded a doctoral degree in Sacred Theology, STD, Maxima Cum Laude. Here you see the photo, whether hiking in the woods or camping out. His name is Lolek. Lolek loves nature. He loves outdoors. You can see the photo of Carol. Carol is deeply inspired by his teachers. You can see his photo, the young Carol poses with them on a visit to Wadowice in 1950. You see a photo here, Carol visits his grandmother, Marie Anna Wadrowska in 1952. 1953, professor of moral theology, Carol at the major seminary at Krakow, then on the Faculty of Theology. 1954, he became a professor of ethics at the Catholic University at Lublin. Now we see a little video on John Paul II, an actor with the vocation for the priesthood.
When he was young, he overcame the death of his entire family. He endured the hard life of a labor worker, and he studied in secrecy with the help of his professors. That's how John Paul II's vocation was shaped. His story began in the small Polish town of Wadowice on May 18, 1920. He was baptized 1 month later. He said it was here that his vocation as a Christian and for the priesthood was born. After finishing high school, he enrolled at the Jagiellonian University of Krakow to study Polish philology and also enrolled in an acting school. But the war and the Nazi occupation would change his plans.
Si può dire che la mia giovinezza, anni giovanili, sono marcati da una parte da grande provvidenza divina, perché tanti miei colleghi hanno perso la vita in diverse circostanze, nelle guerre. Se si pensa di campi di concentramento, se si pensa di questa cosiddetta in ebraico Shoah, vuol dire esterminazione di un popolo, di alcuni popoli. Allora tutto questo appartiene alla storia del nostro secolo e questa storia io ho vissuto, appunto negli anni giovanili. Ho imparato attraverso queste sofferenze certamente di vedere la realtà del mondo in modo più profondo.
At the age of 19, he started working at a stone quarry and later at a chemical factory in Solvay to earn a living and to avoid deportation to Germany. 3 years later, he decided to join an underground seminary organized by the Bishop of Krakow, Cardinal Sapieha.
Questa esperienza di un operaio e nello stesso tempo di un seminarista clandestino mi è rimasta per tutta la vita. Venendo nella fabbrica per fare il mio turno, 8 ore di giorno o di notte, ho portato con me alcuni libri I miei colleghi, vuol dire gli operai, si sono meravigliati un po', ma non scandalizzati. Mi hanno detto, ti aiuteremo, anche puoi dormire un po' e al tuo posto cercheremo di sorvegliare. E così ho fatto gli esami anche, gli esami davanti ai miei professori, tutto in clandestinità.
This training, which helped him better understand the world, ended with his ordination on November the 1st, 1946, the Solemnity of All Saints. A few friends and family members were the only witnesses at the ceremony, which took place at the residence of the Archbishop of Krakow.
Poi non solamente che ho fatto esame, ma ho constatato che questa metafisica, questa filosofia cristiana mi dà una nuova visione del mondo, una più profonda penetrazione dalla realtà. Prima avevo gli studi piuttosto umanistici, attaccati alla letteratura, alla lingua, e qui con questa metafisica, con la filosofia in genere, ho trovato la chiave per una comprensione, per una penetrazione intellettuale del mondo più profonda e direi ultima.
Karol Wojtyła continued to be the same person he always was, and he kept up his interest in literature and theater. The only difference, the one that would make him become one of the most beloved men in church history, was his faith. He will always be remembered for his commitment to follow Christ, his love for every person emanating from him, and his dedication to children, young people, and the underprivileged.
July 24, 1958, he was appointed auxiliary bishop in Krakow at the age of 38. As auxiliary bishop of Krakow, Karol visits the Tatra Valley in 1961. The future vicar of Rome becomes auxiliary bishop of Krakow. 1959, he became an established scholar and prolific writer and was named a member of the Polish Academy of Sciences. 1962 to 1965, Bishop Wojtyła took part in the Second Vatican Council. 1962 to 1965, Bishop Wojtyła made a significant contribution to the drafting of the Constitution of the Second Vatican Council document Gaudium et Spes. June 13, 1964, he was appointed Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Krakow at the age of 44. June 26, 1967, he was created Cardinal by Pope Paul VI at the age of 47. During his inauguration as a Cardinal by Pope Paul VI, the Archbishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła, kisses the hand of the Holy Father. You can see the photo. The future Pope meets the current Vicar of Rome, Pope Paul VI, to join the College of Cardinals. From the ramparts of the 600-year-old Wawel Cathedral in Krakow, Poland, Karol Wojtyła returns from Rome as a newly elevated Cardinal. Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, Archbishop of Krakow, Poland. You see the photo in 1968. Cardinal Karol also took part in the 5 assemblies of the Synod of Bishops prior to the start of his pontificate. The new cardinal meets with his friends and family in the garden of his residence and asks for prayers. Even though he is elevated to being cardinal, the future John Paul II continues to minister to his neighborhood parish. October 16, 1978, Cardinal Wojtyla was elected Pope at the age of 58. October 16, 1978, Cardinal Wojtyla took the name of John Paul II. Pope John Paul II became the first non-Italian Pope since Pope Hadrian VI, the year 1522 to 1523. The crowd erupts in cheers when the newly Holy Father addresses the faithful from his balcony in Vatican City, October 16, 1978. Let's go to the legacy of Pope John Paul II.
Un altro grande amico, Nazioni Unite, hanno organizzato un anno della gioventù. Loro hanno organizzato, hanno annunciato, noi abbiamo fatto.
No pope has connected with young people quite like John Paul II. In 1984, 6 years after his election, Pope John Paul asked young people to gather in Rome. More than 300,000 accepted his invitation, and World Youth Day was born. Since then, there have been World Youth Days in Argentina, Spain, Poland, the USA, the Philippines, France, Canada, and Italy.
Vi faccio una benedizione. Siete bravi, siete buoni. Mi piace essere con voi.
John Paul II not only set time aside for young people abroad, but at home as well. He'd often open the doors of the Vatican to have special gatherings, like this one in the Cortile di San Damaso. His message was clear: live a life of chastity, don't take drugs, and strive to become saints. An appeal he repeated in 2000, with nearly 2 million people gathered in Rome to meet him.
Se tu vivi con i giovani, tu dovrai diventare anche giovane.
October 16, 1978, from the moment he stepped on the balcony of St. Peter's, Pope John Paul II has echoed the words, "Be not afraid." In Italian, it is said, "Non abbiate paura, be not afraid." Do not be afraid to open the doors of your hearts to Jesus Christ. Be not afraid was the cry of Pope John Paul II. And he said, "I plead with you, never ever give up on hope. Never give up on hope. Never doubt. Never tire. And never become discouraged. Be not afraid." October 22, 1978, the solemn inauguration into the papal ministry at St. Peter's Square. He began his ministry as the universal pastor of the church. You can see the image of Pope Benedict, future Pope Benedict, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, embracing the newly elected Pope that day of his installation. You can see the new Pope, John Paul II, presides over his first Mass at the Sistine Chapel. Here you see the photo. Among a sea of onlookers, Pope John Paul II is installed as the new Vicar of Christ. The faithful crowd surges into St. Peter's Square on October 17, 1978, to hear the first words of the reassurance by their new spiritual leader, Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II impresses the native Romans, people of Rome, gathered there by addressing them in Italian. The new Holy Father asks for the prayers and supports of his people as he takes on the mantle of leadership in the Roman Catholic Church. He does this with a humility and grace that endears him to be the common man. Proud Polish citizens went to St. Peter's Square to attend the installation of their newly, we can say, from Poland, Polish, in their native costumes, and among those gathered outside St. Peter's Basilica were the Polish people to attend the official installation ceremony of Pope John Paul II, the former Archbishop of Krakow. Here you see Cardinal Leger from Canada pledges obedience to the Holy Father. The colleges of cardinals flocked to the side of the new pontiff on the day of his inauguration. Let's go a little more to his life. He began. We were saying he was a student of philosophy, a student of literature and drama, a teacher of ethics and theology, ordained priest in 1946, soon rising to the role of the Archbishop and Cardinal, soon rising then to be a Cardinal on the road to Rome, the Church's highest office. We can say, beloved and brave priest, evangelist, and poet. See the photo here, Cardinal Stefan Winczynski, his contemporary kissing him when he was elected as Pope. Let's go to this video. Blessed Pope John Paul II, a friendly Pope. Pope John Paul II describes his role to be the witness of universal love. Pope John Paul II showed the world that the Holy Father is not merely visible but accessible. Pope John Paul II is not only man's spiritual inspiration, Pope John Paul II, but a friend. Pope John Paul II's unrivaled triumphs are the result of his charismatic personality. The staggering number of international pilgrimages and the dramatic messages which he imparts to the world. Pope John Paul II made 146 pastoral visits in Italy. As a Bishop of Rome, he visited 317 of the current 322 Roman parishes. Pope John Paul II completed 146 pastoral visits within Italy. Pope John Paul II took the papacy on the road as a pilgrim pope. He visited more countries and he visited 129 countries. Pope John Paul II practically spent 322 days or more than 2 1/4 year outside the Vatican. Pope John Paul II read more than 20,000 addresses totaling to 100,000 pages. Here we see Pope John Paul II, we love you. The most photographed public figure of his era was John Paul II. He was the most photographed public figure of his era. He was the most seen in person by more people in the world. And he was called by the Times Magazine a Pope for all seasons. That time, over 15 covers of Time Magazine features the event in the life and pontifical ministry of our beloved John Paul II. He was called the Great. Pope John Paul II, the Great, the most celebrated and inspiring leader of our times. Pope John Paul II has shaped world events. He gave a new and deeper direction to millions. He gave a new, deeper spiritual inspiration to millions, not only in his life, but even in his death. Pope John Paul II was in his going to 27th year as the Holy Father when he died. He was one of the longest reigning popes in history, and Pope John Paul II reigned for 26 years, 5 months, and 16 days. Despite of his sicknesses, illnesses, infirmity, Pope John Paul II tirelessly preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. Pope John Paul II defended life in all its forms. Pope John Paul II wrote on the different topics on Catholic faith. Pope John Paul II pleaded for peace in the world. He was responsible for the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. Here you see the statue of Lenin coming down in Russia. We can see the triumph, the return of freedom came to Poland in Eastern Europe because of the intervention of Pope John Paul II. He also worked for ecumenical dialogues. He worked for interreligious dialogues. You can see here a meeting that happened in Assisi, Italy in the year 1986, where Pope John Paul II convened together all the world religious leaders to pray for peace. Indeed, he was a man of peace. You see here, John Paul II is speaking year to address in the United Nations, October 2, 1979. Pope John Paul II was a man of dialogue. You can see, because above all, he was a man of God, a man of faith, a man of love. John Paul II was a man of hope. Remember the words, never, never give up hope. John Paul II was the most recognized man in the history of the world, satellite all over the world. Millions of people watched the most widely watched funeral of Pope John Paul II connected via satellite all over the world. Pope John Paul II was the biggest attended funeral by world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, head of states, diplomats, religious leaders, people from all walks of life, poor, rich, priest, lay, attended the funeral of Pope John Paul II. In Pope John Paul II, we realize the unity of all Christians, not only of all Christians, but the unity of all religions. In him, John Paul II, we realize the prayer of Jesus for his disciples, Father, may they all be one, that all may be one, just as I am one with you, and you in me, that the world may believe that you sent me. Father, may they all be one. Pope John Paul II delivered more speeches. He met with more world leaders, and we can say he has become the most recognized figure in the world. John Paul II, we read, the man, the Pope, in his message has left an indelible legacy in our world today. John Paul II, declared by Times Magazine again and again as the man of the year. For 14 times, Pope John Paul II has become the most powerful leader in the world. Pope John Paul had carefully guarded against any change in the traditional doctrine of the church. He was a little bit strict in church doctrine and practice. You can see how Pope John Paul II has preserved the church's position on issues such as contraception. He preserved the church teaching on abortion, homosexuality. He preserved the church teaching on clerical marriages, admission of women in the priesthood, which he did not allow at all. He maintained the church Catholic teaching. Pope John Paul II has preached a crusade like the one done by Pope Urban II and Pope Eugene III. John Paul II is a holy warrior. You can see, against a shackles of tyranny and oppression, he declared really a holy war against all forms of tyranny and oppression and social injustice. He declared a holy war in his fight for religious freedom and human rights. He said, the ultimate test of greatness is the way you treat every human being. He said, freedom consists not in doing what we like, but freedom consists in having the right to do what we ought. He said, a person's rightful due is to be treated as an object of love, not as an object for use, love, and never use. Pope John Paul II fought for religious freedom and human rights. Pope John Paul II is a voice against terrorism, a voice against terrorism. And Pope John Paul II has reached out to the world. Do you know, if we will study all the encyclicals apostolic exhortations, apostolic letters, apostolic constitution, all these documents of Pope John Paul II, it will amount to a whole cabinet. As you can see, the volumes of book, compilation written on these documents, speeches, writings, discourses, apostolic letter, and so on, encyclical exhortation of our beloved Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II issued more than 100 major documents. Pope John Paul II wrote 14 encyclicals. He wrote 15 apostolic exhortations. He wrote 11 apostolic constitution. He wrote 45 apostolic letters. And the first encyclical he wrote was Redemptoris Hominis in 1979 on the Redeemer of Man. Another encyclical in 1980, Dives in Misericordia, on the mercy of God. 1981, he wrote the encyclical Laborem Exercens on human work, the dignity of human work and labor. Laborens Exercens. He wrote the encyclical Familiaris Consortio on the role of the Christian family in the modern world. 1988, he wrote the encyclical Mulieres Dignitatem on the dignity and vocation of women. In 1990, he wrote the encyclical Redemptor Missio on the permanent validity of the Church's missionary mandate. You can see an encyclical that he wrote on the mission of Christ the Redeemer. 1992, he wrote the encyclical on the formation of priests, Pastores Dabo Vovis. In 1993, he wrote the encyclical on certain fundamental questions of church moral teachings, Veritatis Splendor. Veritatis Splendor, Pope John Paul II spoke of the truth of the church's moral teachings. 1995, he wrote the encyclical The Value and Inviolability of Human Life, Evangelium Vitae. In 1979, he wrote the encyclical Catechesis in Our Time, Catechesi Tradende. And for us in the continent of Asia, John Paul II wrote an apostolic exhortation, Ecclesia in Asia, meaning on Jesus Christ, the Savior, in His mission and love in the service of Asia. 1984, he wrote the apostolic exhortation on reconciliation and penance, Reconciliatio et Penitentia. In 1988, he wrote the apostolic exhortation on the mission of the lay faithful in the church and in the world, Christi Fidelis Laici. In 1989, he wrote the apostolic exhortation on Saint Joseph, guardian of the Redeemer, Redemptoris Custos. In 1994, he wrote the apostolic exhortation as the third millennium draws near, Tertio Millennio Adveniente. Later on, afterwards, he wrote the encyclical apostolic exhortation Novo Millennio Innuente at the close of the great Jubilee year 2000, at the beginning of the new millennium, year 2000. And much more relevant to us in this time of pandemic, he wrote an apostolic letter on the Christian meaning of human suffering, Salvifici Doloris, 1995. He wrote an encyclical, Ut Unum Sint, that they may be one, an encyclical on commitment to ecumenism. 1996, he wrote an apostolic letter on the Versi Dominici Grecis on the vacancy of the apostolic see and the election of the Roman Pontiff. 1998, he wrote the apostolic letter Dies Domini on keeping the Lord's Day holy. He wrote in 1998 the apostolic letter on combating abortion and euthanasia. And he wrote another encyclical, very relevant, the apostolic letter Fides et Ratio, meaning faith and reason. John Paul II had beatified 1,338, more than all his predecessors in the last 4 centuries combined. Pope John Paul II emphasized on the universal call to holiness. He himself canonized more saints. He canonized 482 saints. He had made 231 cardinals. 117 are eligible to vote for the next pope. And he made 9 consistories, 15 synods of bishops. He addressed the rich, poor, imbalanced continent by continent in post-synodal documents. He held more than 1,160 Wednesday General Audience at the Vatican in Rome. Pope John Paul II had met more than 17.64 million pilgrims in his pontificacy. Pope John Paul II had met 8 million pilgrims only during the Jubilee year 2000. You can imagine, Pope John Paul II had 738 audiences and meetings with head of states. And Pope John Paul II had 246 audiences and meeting with prime ministers. He had talked with more than 1,590 heads of states. Let's go to the global ministry of Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II was the first non-Italian pontiff in more than 4 centuries. He inspired the world by leaving Rome for foreign shores. He made a journey 104 times more than all the previous popes combined. You can see here in the plane of Pope John Paul II, written here, the very public pontiff, in a very quiet, reflective moment on his private plane on the route to another destination in his world ministry. We love Pope John Paul II. Why? Why do we love him? Because Pope John Paul II came to speak to us. We love him, Pope John Paul II. Some of the footages, pictures, when he went to United States, 1979, Philadelphia, in Poland, 1979. This is in Nicaragua. The Holy Father John Paul II celebrates Mass on 19th of July at the piazza against the backdrop of a mural of Sandina and Carlos Fonseca. Here you see, in 1983, Pope John Paul II in Panama City. Here you see in Panama City. In here, you see him in Italy, in his skiing, his sports at Mount Adamero, Italy. 1984, John Paul II went to Bangkok in Thailand, even to meet with the Buddhist leaders and Buddhist monks. John Paul II always had an occasion to meet, to talk, and inspired Blessed Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta. They were great friends. Here, the Pontiff takes Mother Teresa for a ride in his Pope Mobile on 1986 visit to India. 1986, Pope John Paul went to Chelam in Bogota, Colombia. And here, another event in John Paul II. In 1987, you see he went to Chile, and you see here the dictator of Chile, President General Augusto Pinochet. In 1987, in New Orleans, United States of America, And here in Italy, 1987, his visit Val Bisdende. 1989, John Paul II went to East Timor. 1990, he went to Bujumbura, Burundi. And he went also to Nairobi, Kenya, 1995. He had the occasion to address the United Nations. 1995, he went to Baltimore, United States. Here in 1996, you see John Paul II in Caracas. 1998, again in Italy, Colle Valdelsa. In 1997, John Paul II had the opportunity to visit Beirut in Lebanon. In 1997, he went to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Again, Pope John Paul II was the one who started the World Youth Day. You see him now in Paris, France in 1997. John Paul II loved mountain areas. You see the Italian Dolomites mountains near the Austrian border, and there you see Pope John Paul II taking time to rest on those mountains. Again, in 1998, John Paul went to Onitsha in Nigeria City. In 1999, he went to India. In 1999, he went to Tbilisi, the former Soviet Republic. See here, John Paul II at the Dolomite Mountains, Lorenzago di Cadore in Italy, 1996. In Sydney, Australia, he was there in 1995. Here in Johannesburg, here in Rome in 1996, 1996 Italian Alps, 1996 again tours in France, in Rome 1996, in Zakopane, southern Poland in 1997, in France during the World Youth Day. World Youth Day 2000, year 2000, he was there in Rome, Italy. And you see here at the Sistine Chapel, he did administered also the baptism. And you see an event that happened in 1999. Pope John Paul II went also to Ukraine. In here, he went to Mexico, some more footages, Madagascar, and of course, in our country. He visited our country for the first time in 1981, Manila, the Philippines. But before we go to this, let's watch a video.
A great man, outstanding, perhaps the most outstanding man in the world, and certainly the most outstanding person I've ever known.
It's about a 76-year life, about probably the most remarkable life of our time.
I think he was an absolute person. He believed in absolute truth. He believed in God, and he believed that God's revelation, whether it be through the scriptures or through the traditions and teachings of the church, were things that had something to say to everyone, not just the Catholics.
To watch him in action, you talk about a pastor, you talk about an evangelist, you talk about a man of warmth and sincerity and vigor, and just an all-embracing giant of a man.
Who has been seen and heard by more people than any individual in the history of the earth.
Pope John Paul practiced what he preached. He was a man of faith, he was a man of love. He was prepared to call people out of their comfort zones. He was prepared to challenge people to live up to their capacity, whether it be especially young people, and also the Poles suffering under communism. People were prepared to follow him. He's one of the most remarkable popes in Catholic history.
Blessed John Paul II reigned as Pope of the Catholic Church from 1978 until his death in 2005. In Wadowice, Poland, Blessed John Paul II, originally Karol Joseph Wojtyła, was born on May 18, 1920, to Emilia and Karol Wojtyła Sr. As a boy, Karol was athletic, often playing soccer and multiple other sports. At a young age, his mother encouraged him to join the priesthood. After the death of his father, he started thinking more seriously about it, and in October 1942, he began courses in the clandestine underground seminary run by the Archbishop of Krakow. Upon finishing his studies at the seminary in Krakow, Wojtyła was ordained a priest on All Saints' Day, November 1st, 1946. He returned to Poland in the summer of 1948 with his first pastoral assignment in the village of Niedźwiłk. He arrived at Niedźwiłk, where his first action was to kneel and kiss the ground. This gesture, which he adapted from the French Saint John Mary Vianney, would become a trademark action during his papacy. After 12 years of priesthood, Karol was appointed by Pope Pius XII as an auxiliary bishop. At age 38, he was the youngest bishop in Poland. During his years as bishop, he was able to take part in the Second Vatican Council, where he made great contributions and was highly influential. A short 7 years after being appointed as bishop, Pope Paul VI announced Karol Wojtyła's promotion into the College of Cardinals on June 26, 1967. After the passing of Pope Paul VI, a conclave was called and Pope John Paul I was elected. John Paul I died after only 33 days, and a conclave was called again to elect a new pope. After the 8th ballot on the second day, Karol Wojtyła was elected as pope and chose the name John Paul II in honor of his immediate predecessor. Pope John Paul II became the 264th pope and the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. During his 26-year papacy, he became one of the most influential leaders in history, at the same time being loved by all, regardless of religion, race, or background. He visited 129 countries, traveling 1.1 million kilometers to meet with people all around the world. He visited India for the first time in 1986 to attend the International Eucharistic Congress held in Bombay, and a second time in November of 1999 for the post-synodal apostolic exhortation, Ecclesia in Asia, held in New Delhi. During his visit in 1986, John Paul II ordained Sister Alfonsa's beatification. Sister Alfonsa would become the first Indian and Syro-Malabar saint. During his papacy, the Pope put a great emphasis on the youth. By establishing World Youth Day, he was able to gather millions of Catholic youth from all around the world for the first time in history. Along with this, he was able to significantly improve the Catholic Church's relations with other religions, including Judaism, Islam, and other Christian denominations. In addition, he found time to write 13 encyclicals, 13 apostolic exhortations, 11 apostolic constitutions, and 42 apostolic letters. John Paul II has been credited with being instrumental in bringing down communism in Central and Eastern Europe, by being the spiritual inspiration behind its downfall and a catalyst for a peaceful revolution in Poland. On May 13, 1981, as John Paul II entered St. Peter's Square to address an audience, he was shot and critically wounded by a fascist Turkish gunman, Mehmet Ali Agca. After losing 3/4 of his blood and 5 hours of surgery, Pope John Paul II made an astounding recovery, which he attributed to Our Lady of Fatima. Agca was caught and sentenced to life imprisonment. 2 years later, the Holy Father visited him in prison. John Paul II said, "What we talked about will have to remain a secret between him and me. I spoke to him as a brother, whom I have pardoned and who has my complete trust." After only 25 years on the papal throne, 2 assassination attempts, and a number of cancer scares, John Paul's physical health declined. In 2001, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Despite difficulty speaking, trouble hearing, and severe osteoarthritis, he continued to tour the world, although rarely walking in public. Pope John Paul II has been a blessing for the Syro-Malabar Church as well. He elected the first Syro-Malabar bishop into the College of Cardinals, Mar Varkividiete. Furthermore, he established the St. Thomas Syro-Malabar Diocese of Chicago on March 13, 2001. The Blessed John Paul II Syro-Malabar Mission in Garfield, New Jersey, is the second church in the United States to take upon his name. On March 31, 2005, John Paul II developed septic shock and was nearing death. It was decided to keep him at his private residence rather than bringing him to the hospital. Thousands upon thousands gathered outside St. Peter's Square, praying for the Holy Father. Then, on April 2, 2005, John Paul II said his last words, "Let me depart to the house of the Father," and died near after. Upon hearing the news, an estimated 4 million people gathered for his funeral, including 4 kings, 5 queens, about 70 presidents and prime ministers, and 14 other religious leaders. Soon after his death, his successor, Pope Benedict, began the process for the beatification of John Paul II, bypassing the usual 5-year grace period. On May 1, 2011, John Paul II was beatified by Pope Benedict, after which his tomb was sealed in St. Peter's, under the altar of St. Sebastian. Few men have left a more positive imprint on the world than Blessed John Paul II. He brought hope to all corners of the world, to people of all faiths and backgrounds. He is a man that will never be forgotten.
Now we go to our country, our beloved country, when Pope John Paul II visited us for the first time in 1991, Manila, Philippines. I was a young seminarian that time, and I was there at Luneta, even at the Quezon Memorial Silker, witnessing this John Paul II in our midst, 1981. Here you see Pope John Paul II entering Baclaran Church, the Mother Perpetual Church shrine in Baclaran. You see, you are familiar. John Paul II was narrating, he was there as a cardinal, and for the second time visit at the Baclaran shrine, he was already a pope. He was very much devoted to the Mother of Perpetual Help because his own hometown parish in Poland is dedicated to the Mother of Perpetual Help. That's why he loved this shrine of the Mother of Perpetual Help in Baclaran. Here you see some photos of Cardinal Jaime Elsin with Pope John Paul II. In 1995, this will be his second visit to our country for the World Youth Day 1995. See these images. They were saying 7 to 8 million people attended. Proven the figure of 8 million was given by the Japanese satellites who even went to His Eminence Jaime Cardinal Sin here in Villa San Miguel where I'm standing, and they even narrated to Cardinal Sin, showing Cardinal Sin the photos, how they count through the Japanese satellite that it was not 5 million, 6 million, it was 8 million according to the Japanese. It became, that time, the greatest crowd gathered around the Holy Father. But do you know, it was exceeded later on, year 2014, when Pope John Paul II went to Manila. Pope Francis, you can see how our beloved country is really a love country. We love the Holy Father and God loves us so much. Here, during the time of 1995, you can see these footages of people over Quirino Grandstand up to Baclaran. They said up to the part of Manila, all crowded. It was considered as the biggest Eucharistic celebration ever in the history of the world. Let's move forward with some memorable visit of Pope John Paul II in Cuba. He visited Cuba in 1998. Of course, he had to encounter the dictator of Cuba, Fidel Castro. And there, Pope John Paul II delivered a strong message of religious freedom. Bring back Christ to Cuba. And the people there were shouting, Libertad, Libertad. Libertad is the Spanish word for freedom, freedom. And they were shouting in front of the dictator Fidel Castro. Here is the miracle. John Paul II was the first, we can say, a person was able to encounter the Jews there in Israel. Of course, Pope Paul VI already went to Israel, but here is the most memorable encounter when first John Paul II visited the Jewish synagogue in Rome. Now, he himself went to Israel. Before in Rome, John Paul II established the diplomatic ties between the Catholic Church and Israel. Here you see John Paul II also praying at the Wailing Wall, western wall of the temple in Jerusalem. In 1996, as I have told you, Pope John Paul II already visited a Jewish synagogue in Rome, where he really made a step to go out of the Vatican to establish the diplomatic ties with the Jews. Pope John Paul II even asked forgiveness for all the atrocities that we may have done against them. Year 2000, now, he prayed at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, which won the hearts of many Jews worldwide. That's why he was well loved by the Jews, even our very own Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, because of what Pope John Paul II really started. Pope John Paul II went even to you can see, the Holocaust Museum to unite himself with all those Jews who were slaughtered at the concentration camp during World War II. Here again, another dramatic event, when he visited Syria, Damascus, Syria, the Pope John Paul II visit a Muslim mosque. You see in this image, it moved the Muslims into dialogue with him when he started kissing the book of Islam. John Paul II kissing the Quran. And Pope John Paul II visiting the mosque, really, so many mosques that he visited, it really touches the hearts of our Muslims, brothers and sisters with the Islam religion. In Morocco, this is very beautiful. Pope John Paul II spoke to thousands of Muslim youths who was cheering for him They love him. The Muslims love him. When I had the occasion to study in Rome spirituality, I have a chance to talk to some Muslims, and they will really tell me, as a Catholic priest, they will tell me they love John Paul II. They share, because the Muslims and the Catholics, we share the same moral teachings, pro-life, for life, against all abortions, contraceptions, and so on. Pope John Paul II, again, twice convened the leaders of other religions for prayer meeting in Assisi. This is really an accomplishment of Pope John Paul II. In Assisi, all religious leaders convened by Pope John Paul II denounced the acts of war. They denounced terrorism in the name of religion, and they pray for world peace. Pope John Paul II is known for his holiness. One of his accomplishments is this: he repurposed the universal call to holiness, his life of prayer, his holiness. This is John Paul II. We said, a man of God, a man of prayer. Pope John Paul II had reminded the world that time 1.1 billion Catholics during the lifetime of John Paul II about their call to holiness. Now we see this video. Pope John Paul II, we love you.
I see friends shaking hands, singing, how do you do? They really say, I love you. I hear babies cry and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like a lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. And the dream that you dare to, why, oh, why can't I?
Fratelli e sorelle, non abbiate paura di accogliere Cristo e di accettare la sua potestà, e con la potestà di Cristo servire l'uomo e l'umanità intera. Non abbiate paura, aprite, anzi spalancate le porte a Cristo.
Vedo in voi le sentinelle del mattino in quest'alba del terzo millennio. Oggi siete qui convenuti per affermare che nel nuovo secolo voi non vi presterete ad essere strumenti di violenza e distruzione, difenderete la faccia, pagando anche di persona se necessario. Poi non vi rassegnerete ad un mondo in cui altri esseri umani muoiono di fame, restano analfabeti, mancano di lavoro. Voi difenderete la vita in ogni momento del suo sviluppo terreno. Vi sforzerete con ogni vostra energia di rendere questa terra sempre più abitabile per tutti. Cari giovani del secolo che inizia, dicendo sì a Cristo, voi dite sì ad ogni vostro più nobile ideale. io prego perché Egli regni nei vostri cuori e nell'umanità del nuovo secolo e del nuovo millennio. Non abbiate paura di affidarvi a Lui, Egli vi guiderà, vi darà la forza di seguirlo ogni giorno e in ogni situazione.
Our saint, Pope John Paul II, was truly a Marian Pope. He loved the Blessed Virgin Mary so much that his devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, his words, totus tuus, which he got to Saint Louis Marie Grignon de Montfort, act of consecration to Jesus through Mary. May 13, 1981, Mehmet Ali Adka, a Turkish assassin hired by the Eastern European communists, shot the Holy Father at St. Peter's Square. You see, John Paul II, a stricken Pope John Paul II, is cradled in the arms of an aide as he lies at the back of his jeep after being shot while riding in St. Peter's Square, May 13, 1981, the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. You see here the circle shows a hand holding a gun in the crowd moments before the attempt on the Holy Father's life in St. Peter's Square. Circle shows hand showing a gun in the crowd moments before the attempt on the Holy Father's life in St. Peter's Square. Here is the assailant, assassin, Ali Adka, is photographed by a tourist as he runs away from the scene of the shooting. Here you see the Holy Father now at Gemelli Hospital. The Holy Father was alert soon after the surgery and in charge of his own care. That was the very moment the Holy Father was praying to our Blessed Virgin Mary, Totus tuus, I am all yours, O Jesus and Mary. When he fell down at the arms of his secretary, during which he was shot, he was praying to our Blessed Mother, O Mary, my Mother, my Queen, save me. And here you see the world later on rejoices as the pontiff is released from the hospital. What we learned from John Paul II, it was Our Lady, according to him, who saved his life. One hand fired the shot, the assassin Muslim, Mehmet Ali Adka, but another hand swayed the shot. Because Ali Adka, using 3 poisonous bullets, the 3 poisonous bullets was not able to hit the 3 internal organs that Mehmet Ali Adka would like to hit. Later on, Ali Adka, when Pope John Paul visited him, tells the Holy Father about fears. He said, Ali Adka was moved by the Pope's visit and kisses his ring. He was really so amazed. He told John Paul II, do you know, I was carefully chosen to kill you, to assassinate you, because they consider me as the best shooter in our rank. And Pope John Paul II told him, they did not commit a mistake in choosing you, being the best shooter in the world, but they made the mistake in choosing the date, May 13, because May 13 is the anniversary of Our Lady of Fatima, and Ali Adka asked the Holy Father, who is Fatima? Who is this goddess? More powerful that he was able to evade your death. That's why here is a miracle. The assassination happened, attempt May 30, 1981, Fatima's anniversary of the apparition. The shots were meant to silence the Holy Father, for they were so afraid of Pope John Paul II that the communist socialist regime might go bankrupt because, and it was Our Lady who saved his life. Now let's go to this event, May 13, 1981, the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II.
A terrible quiet fell on the thousands who were gathered at St. Peter's Square at the Vatican today, a shocked quiet. 10,000 or more had come to receive the blessing of Pope John Paul. Instead, amongst the cheering and the peal of bells announcing the arrival of the Pope, they heard gunfire and saw the Pope turn pale and collapse, bloody, into the arms of his aides. Pope John Paul II had been shot. A Turkish terrorist who had threatened to kill the Pope 2 years ago is being held tonight by Italian police, the main suspect in the shooting. His Holiness was immediately thought to be in grave condition as he was brought into the operating room. Then, for over 4 hours, surgeons worked. His most serious wound, a shot through his abdomen. Doctors removed 2 parts of the Pope's intestines. The doctors called the operation, quote, successful. Tonight, they say, the Pope's condition, however, is guarded because, after all, there is still the possibility of infection. This act of violence directed against a man of peace stunned the world. Good evening again. I'm Dan Rather, CBS News, reporting from Los Angeles. This is the CBS News Special Report. And with me tonight in our New York newsroom are Harry Reasoner and Bob Schieffer.
Dan, it is already the early hours of Thursday morning in Rome. The Vatican, like the rest of the world, is trying to adjust to the shock of this attack on the life of Pope John Paul II. Doug Tennell is standing by now to tell us more about the mood of Rome at this hour. And Doug, it must be a somber scene indeed there where you are.
Certainly is. There is very much the atmosphere of shock, even in these early hours. Small groups of people are still walking through St. Peter's Square, looking for the exact place where what happened today happened, talking with the people there, exchanging the latest word on the condition of the Pope, and of course, some of them on bended knee, praying before portraits of the Pope and hoping for his speedy recovery.
Doug, I know you've just been to the emergency room at the hospital where the Pope was taken. What can you tell us about the situation there?
Very recently spoke with one of the doctors in the hospital who told us that his condition at this moment is satisfactory. The Pope was conscious after the operation, which in fact was more than 4 hours and quite extensive. He was breathing unaided after the operation. And the doctor has said that his operation was successful. However, they are now quite concerned about the possibility of infection. The Pope, in addition, had some of the fingers on one hand broken, hit by a stray bullet, and has been wounded in at least 6 places.
Doug, this will certainly revive questions about the whole idea of papal security. What can you tell us about that tonight?
While the Pope travels in Italy, he has been using only the barest of security. In fact, the Vatican security procedures have been just bare minimum. He has less than 50 plainclothes detectives with him in Italy most of the time when he travels. He's been making a number of public appearances. Most of those plainclothes agents are former Italian police, retired, and really involved more in crowd control than anything else. So what happened today was something that people had speculated on. It was something that seemed imminently possible, and yet he's the man, kind of man who wanted to be so close to people, to show his trust in people, his affection for his flock, that he would not take more stringent security precautions and put a body of bodyguards between himself and the faithful who'd come out to see him.
Doug Tennell reporting from Rome. Doug, thank you. Harry?
The shooting occurred at 5:19 Rome time. Up until then, it had been one of those gloriously bright Roman afternoons. The Pope appeared in his usual sunny mood as his white Jeep made its way slowly through St. Peter's Square. 15,000 people had gathered for the Pope's weekly audience with the general public. As he so often does, he was traveling out in the open. As he so often does, he stopped to kiss a child. The pictures from Italian television for some reason go into slow motion here. An eerie prefiguring here on what looks like a joyful day full of balloons. Suddenly, the Pope's Jeep was hurtling out of the crowd, the guards running ahead and at its side. People in the crowd said they could see the Pope as he slumped into the arms of an aide. They said they could see blood on the front of his white silk robe. A still photographer got a picture of the Pope as he gripped his hand, where apparently one of the bullets hit. We have an eyewitness description of what happened next from Nicholas Raluk of New York.
There was people of many, many different nationalities all around me who couldn't understand each other, but we understood one word, that the Pope was hurt. As soon as the Pope realized that the Pope had been shot, people then broke out into crying, and they were dropping to their knees praying.
This is one of the two women who were also injured by the gunman's shots. One was Ann Audrey, a widow from Buffalo, New York. The other bystander, apparently hit by stray bullets, was a 21-year-old woman, Rose Hill, from Jamaica. A priest got on the Vatican's loudspeaker to ask the crowd to pray for the Pope, the Lord's Prayer, and the Ave Maria. One aide said that on the way to the hospital, the Pope prayed quietly in Polish. The police went to work immediately. On the piazza, they found and marked the spot where a bullet casing had landed. Immediately after the shots were fired, people in the crowd apparently tackled a young man whom police quickly hustled off into custody. He's been identified as Mehmet Ali Hakka, a convicted assassin who had escaped from a prison in Turkey. The Turkish press reported that he had left a note behind in his prison cell threatening to kill the Pope. Today, he reportedly kept repeating, "I couldn't care less about life." We'll have a full report on him later.
From the beginning, the Pope has impressed anyone who's seen him with his robustness, his vigor. This, after all, is the skiing Pope. Yet he's also a man with a demanding schedule who's going to be 61 years old on Monday. Health and science correspondent Charles Crawford spoke about the medical aspects of the Pope's injury with an expert on gunshot wounds, Dr. Stephen Lynn, a surgeon at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital here in New York.
Anytime we have an injury to the intestine or even an elective...
It was May 13, 1981, the anniversary of Our Lady of Fatima's apparition at Portugal, when Pope John Paul II was shot. May 13, 1981, the assassination attempt happened. Our Lady truly protected our beloved John Paul II. Our Lady's message at Fatima says, the Holy Father has much to suffer. The Holy Father later on visited this attacker in his prison cell and how he had pardoned and forgiven him. The assassination happened, we said, May 13, the anniversary of Our Lady of Fatima's apparition. And during that time of his recuperation, Pope John Paul II studied well the documents of Fatima. He asked that the third part of the Fatima secret be brought to him from the Vatican archives. The third secret of Fatima, it narrated the Pope John Paul II saw himself in the third part of the secret of Fatima concerning the martyrs of the 20th century, the Pope who falls as if dead, as the message of Our Lady of Fatima to Lucia memoir after being shot. The Holy Father saw himself in that figure. Pope John Paul II said publicly on May 13, 1982, the year after the assassination event when he went to Fatima, that it was the hand of Our Lady of Fatima who saved his life. Because the third secret of Fatima narrated that the Holy Father would die. The bullet is now part of the crown of the miraculous statue of Our Lady of Fatima in the Cova de Iria. Pope John Paul II made the act of collegial consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, of collegial act of consecration of Russia, and consecrating the whole world to Mary's Immaculate Heart. This collegial act of consecration of Pope John Paul II to the Immaculate Heart of Mary happened in union with the World's Bishop, in collegiality with the World's Bishop, on the 25th of March 1984. It was so significant because Pope John Paul II, the Pope who understood Fatima, did what Our Lady is asking. Pope John Paul II, act of collegial consecration, which Our Lady was asking, led to the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. It had concrete, measurable political results in East Central Europe later on with the peaceful revolution of 1989, thanks to the intervention of Our Lady of Peace, which she called herself to at Fatima. Pope John Paul II, act of collegial consecration had immeasurable impact on innumerable lives throughout the world. You see here the photo of Pope John Paul II with one of the visionary of Fatima, Lucia dos Santos, who died at the age of 97 years old. Here you see in 1989, after the consecration of Pope John Paul II to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, this was the result, the fruits of that consecration. The non-violent end to the Cold War is one of the major events of the 20th century history. It may be the most significant. And later on, after the consecration to Our Lady of Fatima, Mikhail Gorbachev, then the leader of the Soviet government, has said several times it would not have happened without Pope John Paul II leadership. Truly, John Paul II was truly a Marian Pope. Pope John Paul II's life and role as Mary's Pope in changing the world he did towards atheism under communism. That's why a Marian Pope, he was called the Pope of the Fatima secret. John Paul II is now credited with the bringing down of the Iron Curtain. Remember the division between the West and the East under the Soviet Union and the West under the United States of America. And John Paul II, we said, he was truly an instrument in liberating a continent, an instrument in the fall of communism. He is credited with the collapse of the communist regime in Eastern Europe, including Russia, and later on the East-West Berlin Wall in Germany. Those who studied the message of Fatima in depth see it as a result, the collapse of Eastern European communists, even in Russia, East-West Berlin Wall in Germany, see it as a result of the collegial act of consecration done by Pope John Paul II in collegiality with the World's Bishop on the 25th of March 1984. We said Pope John Paul II was a Marian Pope, and also Pope John Paul II is a Pope of the Divine Mercy, considered as the greatest story ever told. Pope John Paul II, truly a Pope of the Divine Mercy. Pope John Paul II, we can call him now the Great Mercy Pope. And now, thanks to Pope Francis, who is continuing what John Paul II had started with regards to mercy. Even John Paul II really said, mercy, Dives in Misericordia, God is rich in mercy, is one of his encyclical, and telling us this virtue, this act of mercy that we are called. And now our present Pope Francis was saying, the other name of God, Pope Benedict said, Deus Caritas Est, God is love, the Gospel of St. John, letter of St. John, and Pope Francis later on added, the other name of God is mercy. Thanks to what John Paul II had started, emphasizing on mercy. And we know it was him who started, we can say, who promoted the Divine Mercy devotion. Do you know a very interesting story about Sister Faustina in the Divine Mercy devotion? It was banned by the Vatican in 1939. The CDF congregation, we can say, Congregation of Doctrine of Faith, banned it. Not to read the diary of Sister Faustina, even accused Sister Faustina of all accusations. But it was Pope John Paul II, then Cardinal Karol Wojtyla of Poland, the Archbishop of Krakow, at that time, in 1978, who worked for the lifting of the ban made by the Holy See in relation to the writings of Sister Faustina Kowalska, now known as the Secretary, the Apostle of Mercy. Through the efforts of Cardinal Wojtyla, the ban was lifted by the Vatican on April 15, 1978. 6 months later, Cardinal Wojtyla became Pope John Paul II in October 16, 1978. It was Pope John Paul II, then Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, the Archbishop of Krakow at that time, who made efforts to begin the process of the beatification of Sister Faustina Kowalska. Pope John Paul II later beatified Sister Faustina Kowalska on the 18th of April 1993, the Feast of the Divine Mercy. The second Sunday of Easter, the Divine Mercy Sunday, Sister Faustina was really beatified on that Feast of the Divine Mercy as our Lord's revelation to Blessed Faustina Kowalska. Later on, it was Pope John Paul II who canonized Sister Faustina Kowalska on the 30th of April, year 2000. Again, John Paul II canonized her as she was beatified on the Feast of the Divine Mercy. Now, the canonization of Sister Faustina happened again on the Feast of the Divine Mercy, the second Sunday of Easter. So much to say about our beloved Pope, Saint John Paul II. John Paul II is one of the most celebrated, inspiring leaders of the 20th and 21st century. Pope John Paul II had championed the law of God when others have lost hope and given in to the demands of a fickle world. John Paul II had preached the gospel with clarity and extraordinary insight. John Paul II had guided the church wisely. Pope John Paul II established numerous dioceses all over the world. John Paul II promulgated the codes of canon law. He promulgated the catechism of the Catholic Church. Pope John Paul II proclaimed the year of redemption. He proclaimed the Marian year, being the most Marian Pope. Pope John Paul II proclaimed the Jubilee, Great Jubilee year 2000. John Paul II had touched the hearts of millions outside the fold, the Catholic flock. John Paul II had faced up to any and all the expressions of racism and totalitarianism. This is John Paul II. He had fought for peace and justice with equal vigor. John Paul II had been a missionary traveling the world as no one ever did before him. And this he had continued even in the face of extraordinary physical weaknesses, infirmities, and sickness. See the image of John Paul II now really suffering from so many injuries. Bone, after he was shot, he had bone injuries. He fell down so many times, and now he was suffering of Parkinson's disease. Pope John Paul II had not lost the admiration of youth with advanced age or infirmities. Look what happened in Manila at the Luneta Grandstand with over, they said, 6, 7, 8 million people. John Paul II spent the vigil with them, and you see the young people interacting with them. Lolek, Lolek, we love you. Lolek is nickname, we love you. And John Paul II, with his baston, would play, and the crowd would really cheering up, Pope John Paul, JP2, we love you. And that is John Paul II. That time, he was suffering already with Parkinson's disease. And he did not lose the charism, the admiration of the young people when he started the World Youth Day, which was being done every other year. And John Paul II, we can say, had brought the world to a united world to God. John Paul II's holiness is even more evident in his great sufferings. I was able to talk to a person who attended an international convention of philosophy, philosophers convention. And one of those who attended was a leading Japanese philosopher. And he narrated, he became a Catholic because of John Paul II. Watching the funeral of John Paul II, the famous Scott Hahn, the famous Baptist preacher, turned to be a Catholic now, a devout, fervent Catholic. Now, one of the leading Catholic theologians, he said, he became a Catholic, inspired by the life of the very Pope John Paul II. This is him. In his suffering, he converted more souls than in his healthy life. This is John Paul II's holiness, more evident in his great sufferings. Pope John Paul II is teaching the world to sacrifice. He said, prayer joined to sacrifice constitute the most powerful force in the history of man. Remember, prayer and sacrifice. This is what Our Lady of Fatima had also taught us. See here, in his weakness already, Monsignor Stanislaw de Witt, his secretary who became a Monsignoray, a bishop, later the Cardinal of Krakow, assisting him in his moment of weakness. John Paul II held to his commitment. John Paul II kept his heart and mind focused on Jesus Christ the Redeemer, our Lord, God, and Savior. Remember his words, be not afraid to open wide the doors of your hearts to Jesus Christ, the Redeemer, our Lord, God, and Savior. Do not be afraid to open wide the doors of your heart to Christ. Here we see John Paul II in prayer in his private chapel. Going back to Manila, Guinness Book of Record tells us that the Pope's visit to Manila in 1995, it was the largest gathering ever around the Holy Father in the whole history of the world. But now, we tell you with great joy, it was now exceeded with the visit of our beloved current Pope Francis, who went to Manila and celebrated the Mass at the Luneta Grandstand. During that time in 1995, during the World Youth Day, I was in Rome during that time taking courses in spirituality, my license in spirituality at the Gregorian University, and I remember passing by a news stand because I was so eager to see the news in the Philippines. Avvenire is one of the leading Italian newspaper. I saw there, translated in Italian, saying the biggest Eucharistic celebration ever in the history of the world, Manila, Luneta. And I bought the newspaper. I was so amazed that Avvenire will tell us the Mass of the Holy Father Luneta is the biggest Eucharistic celebration ever in the history of the world. That time, in 1995. Upon his arrival at the Manila International Airport, remember, that was 1995 World Youth Day, you see, Pope John Paul II expressed his special love for Filipino people, and he said in his arrival speech, for a long time, I have looked forward to step to the Philippine soil once more. The Filipino people are never far from my mind and heart. I embrace each one of you with esteem and affection. At the University of Santo Tomas, UST ground, he said, it was my great privilege to be here, to discover anew this phenomenon I knew before. Today, I knew better this great phenomenon of the world and of the church, to the world and to the church. Today, I know better this great phenomenon of the world and of the church, this great phenomenon to the world and to the church, this great phenomenon to the world, to the church. This phenomenon is called Filipino people at the UST grandstand. And then, UST, now we go to the prayer vigil in Luneta. Pope John Paul II has this message to the young people during the prayer vigil in Luneta, and I quote his words. He said, prayer and action, this is what the church asks from you. As the Father sent me, so I am sending you. These words are addressed to you that you learn to proclaim the message of Christ. Christ says to you, this was the message of Pope John Paul II during the prayer vigil at the Luneta, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. You are a sign and epiphany of Jesus Christ. All of you have the responsibility before the Lord to work for the renewal of God's creation everywhere. The following day, at the end of the Mass at the Luneta, it seemed the Holy Father, he was so overwhelmed by over 7 million people. But I told you a while ago, the Japanese who went to His Eminence Jaime Cardinal Sin here in Villa San Miguel, narrated to His Eminence Cardinal Jaime Sin, they really counted it with their Japanese satellite. It was not 6-7 million. It was 8 million people who gathered around Pope John Paul II, his final Mass at the Luneta Grandstand. Pope John Paul II, after his Mass at the Luneta Grandstand, found it difficult to live. You can see 1,000 images of Pope John Paul II imprinted in our minds. The 1,000 images of Pope John Paul II imprinted in our hearts. His thousands images of John Paul II imprinted now in our souls. Before boarding the Philippine Airlines flight, you can see the sadness, as if he was crying as he was boarding the plane. You see the sadness in the face and the eyes of Pope John Paul II, this great man. He said extemporaneously, the Pope feels so well in the Philippines that he looks for another opportunity, perhaps, to return. I don't know how. Beloved brothers and sisters, after 1995, John Paul II was not able to return to our country. He became sick, so much, suffering from Parkinson's disease. But in his heart, there is the Filipino people. Now, as we journey with him, remember the Tibet, I could not forget it, the pilgrim Pope John Paul II, he was now alone in the end. With the Philippine Airlines going to Australia, to Rome, he journeyed onward bravely. A man alone in white cassock against the glazing blue sky, looking heavenward. And then he said to us in the Philippines, goodbye. I remember that it was really a moment of tears, watching the Philippine Airlines flying to the sky, and we remember the words of the Filipino people during his visit in Manila. Pope John Paul II, we love you. JP2, we love you. Saint John Paul II, we love you. We will never say goodbye. We are now here to recall your words during this spiritual conference. We pray to you and humbly ask your intercession. Saint John Paul II, your memory will forever remain in our hearts. You who once was here with us, you will forever remain in our minds and our hearts. We too say with you, our totus tuus, to Jesus through Mary, we are all yours, O Jesus and Mary. We in the Philippines, being a pueblo amante de Maria, a people in love with Jesus and Mary, we renew with you our totus tuus, our total consecration to God through Mary. We can only promise you that we too will live with you and will live for you. John Paul II. We will never say goodbye, but one day we shall see one another in heaven until we meet again in eternal life. You know, the Good Friday of 2005 was a little dramatic. Usually, John Paul II, when he was young, he would carry the cross, via crucis, way of the cross. With what we can watch him, the traditional procession of the cross at the Colosseum. But now it was different. John Paul II, we can say, could not do it anymore. In his early years, he carried the cross, traced Christ's path to the crucifixion. But in the year 2001, he stopped because of his difficulty walking. In his early years, he carried the cross and traced Christ's path to crucifixion, but he stopped in year 2001 because he had difficulty walking. Easter Sunday, 2005, was the first time in the 26 years of pontificate that John Paul II did not celebrate anymore the Easter Sunday Mass at the Vatican. Despite the excruciating pain, the 84-year-old pontiff appeared before tens of thousands of the faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square. He struggled to speak, but he was unable to raise his voice above a whisper. With incredible courage and determination, Pope John Paul II raised his right hand to give the traditional Easter blessing. On Wednesday, March 30, year 2005, His Holiness John Paul II appeared for 4 minutes at his window in the Vatican, raising his hands in blessing. And for the final time, he made the sign of the cross, blessing thousands standing during that vigil in St. Peter's Square. Now we go to this video. Pope John Paul II, Totus Tuus.
Matko Najświętsza, Pani Kalwaryjska, wypraszaj także i mnie siły ciała i ducha, abym wypełnił do końca misję, którą byś zlecił zmartwychwstał. Tobie oddaję wszystkie owoce mego życia i posługi. Tobie zawierzam losy Kościoła. Tobie polecam mój naród. Tobie ufam i Tobie raz jeszcze wyznaję. Totus tuus, Maria, totus tuus. Amen. Totus tuus, Maria, totus tu. Amen. Totus tuus, Maria, totus tuus. Amen. Totus tuus, Maria, totus tuus. Amen.
Pope John Paul II, he said, we must learn not to be afraid. We must discover a spirit of hope and a spirit of trust. Hope is not empty optimism springing from a native confidence that the future will necessarily be better than past. Hope, according to John Paul II, and trust are the premise of responsible activity and nurture in conscience. Beloved brothers and sisters, this is really what we need. Hope. Pope John Paul II, we love you. We go to the last days of Pope John Paul II, the untold stories.
CNN presents winner of the International Documentary Association's Distinguished Award for Best Continuing Series.
A whole crowd has gathered in order to pray in St. Peter's Square.
It was a time the world came together.
Benedetto è il frutto del tuo seno, Gesù.
A square pulsing with prayer, hoping for life, preparing for death.
Cardinalem Wojtyła.
For nearly 27 years, we watched as this man, the leader of the Catholic Church, grew old and frail. His inner strength was apparent to all. Now it is a time for faith and reflection. The moment before everything changed. The Vatican, St. Peter's Square. This is where they came. Those millions who rushed to Rome to pray, to grieve, and to say goodbye to their beloved John Paul II. I'm Delia Gallagher. The images remain as vivid today as they were just a year ago. But for the real story of John Paul's final days, you have to go behind these walls, to those closest to him. Theirs are the untold stories, the stories you've never heard until now.
My life became his life.
For nearly 40 years, Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz and Pope John Paul II were inseparable.
I didn't have a private life. His schedule, his work, became my work, my schedule.
Dziwisz was the Pope's personal secretary, a job he started when John Paul was still Karol Wojtyła, the young Archbishop of Krakow.
He asked me, can you come and help me with my work? And I said, when? He said, today. I told him I'd come tomorrow, and tomorrow lasted for more than 39 years.
Today, 1 year after his friend's death, Dziwisz is back home in Krakow, working the same job, living in the same home, and praying in the same private chapel where his mentor once prayed.
After breakfast, he'd come here, lock himself in and pray by himself until 11. No one else was allowed in. He'd be here alone with Christ. And not only did he pray, he also worked here. The nuns were always curious about what he was doing. They peeked through the keyhole and would see him prostrate on the floor. That was his way of praying. So this chapel was very close to his heart.
He was always very prayerful, and you rarely saw him without a rosary in his hand.
Edmund Szoka is the governor, the chief administrator of Vatican City. He met the Pope 30 years ago.
Oh, gee, he struck me as a very impressive, very kind, very gentle person. He had that gift of expressing friendship, just not only by what he said, but just by his whole personality.
A Polish-American, Szoka was Cardinal of Detroit when in 1990, Pope John Paul summoned him to Rome to help put the Vatican finances in order. A working relationship developed into a friendship.
He always invited me for Christmas dinner and for Easter dinner.
What would that be like, Christmas dinner with the Pope?
Oh, it was delightful. Obviously, you would be tired, you know, after all the ceremonies, but, you know, you wouldn't think so to see him at the meal. He looked very relaxed.
Miracle is needed for beatification, the first step towards sainthood.
We knew of many people who were helped by the prayers of John Paul II when he was living. But for beatification, the miracle has to occur after death. What doesn't count as a miracle? Things like conversions, freedom from vices, peace in the family, getting a new job. These are blessings, but for our
is somebody you can rely on in a sense that his words are always the same and he didn't change, never.
At the Vatican, his grave has become a place of pilgrimage. Crowds, young and old, day after day.
The number of people visiting that tomb is amazing. Last I heard, it was still about 15,000 a day visiting his grave.
They come here as well, to his hometown of Wadowice in Poland. His former house is now a museum. The church where he was baptized, a shrine.
We still feel his presence here. It's ironic, we actually have more visitors now than before his death. It shows how much people need John Paul II and his teachings.
How do you explain that even after his death, people still come to him? They're showing him their love, giving back the love he showed to them.
I prayed for him, certainly, although I have no doubt he went straight to heaven. And I pray to him now.
For those who knew him best, John Paul remains a vibrant figure, someone they still talk with and pray to.
I have great conversations with him. I talk to him as you would talk to Jesus, or the Madonna, or the saints. It isn't difficult.
Do you pray to him?
Yes, I pray.
To the Pope?
to the Pope, yes, every day. His death was for me a big loss, but also, I think, in another way, a big gain, because we have a tutor in heaven.
The people welcomed me here with great love and kindness. I'm able to benefit from the same love they felt for John Paul II.
For the man who was closest to Pope John Paul II, every day is a reminder of his lifelong friend. Stanislaw Dziwisz has come full circle. The former assistant, back in Krakow, now a cardinal himself.
Imagine, I left Krakow with Karol Wojtyła. I lived with him there in Rome for 27 years, and now I have come back alone. But if I'm here, it's also because of John Paul II. I feel protected by him. He took me by the hand and spiritually led me here. I left with him, and now I've come back with him.
The death of the Holy Father, John Paul II, and the days that followed have been an extraordinary period of grace for the Church and the whole world. I seem to feel his strong hand clasping mine. I seem to see his smiling eyes and hear his words, at this moment addressed specifically to me. Do not be afraid.
Pope John Paul II passed away April 2, year 2005, 9:37 p.m., time in Rome, on the first Saturday of the month. Pope John Paul II passed away the last April 2, 2005, on the eve, the vigil of the feast of the Divine Mercy, the vigil of the second Sunday of Easter. Truly, a Marian Pope and a Divine Mercy Pope. Now we see this, Pope John Paul II dies.
I like the statue and then the light.
Il Signore è il mio pastore.
È il mio pastore.
Gli occhi dei miei nemici. Cospargi di olio il mio capo. Il mio calice trabocca.
Jesus nos audit. Jésus.
Lo que él quería es que reinemos nosotros, los jóvenes, y lo que él quiere es la libertad de todos, que creamos en Dios, que tengamos ese corazón abierto a todos, que seamos sinceros, que seamos honestos y lo importante de todo es que nos ayudemos entre todos, ¿no?
De verdad es un momento de grande tristeza, pero al mismo tiempo la tristeza se va y hay una alegría en saber que Juan Pablo II está con el Gran Señor y que todos estamos aquí como una comunidad de católicos y hasta los que no son católicos que están aquí solamente para pedir sus gracias a Juan Pablo II. De verdad es un ambiente bien espiritual.
Estoy muy contento de poder estar aquí porque es la segunda vez, la primera vez en mi país y ahora se da la oportunidad de estar aquí. Triste por la pérdida de un gran hombre, esperando que sus palabras nos ayuden a todos a continuar adelante, ¿no?
Lettre aux personnes âgées de Jean-Paul II. En même temps, j'ai...
Pope John Paul II. The life of Pope John Paul II, we can say, a 27-year pontificate which changed history.
When he was young, he had to overcome the death of his entire family. He worked in a factory while he studied for the priesthood in secrecy. These actions helped shape the personality of John Paul II, one of the most important people of the 20th century and the history of the Catholic Church. He had the makings of an actor, but the arrival of war and Nazi occupation changed his plans. He was a priest under a communist dictatorship in Poland, where Nazi terror had been replaced by the forced labor camps in Siberia and a persecuted church throughout Eastern Europe. His life changed in the fateful year of 1978, known as the Year of the Three Popes. After the death of John Paul I, only 33 days after his election, Cardinal Wojtyła once again traveled to Rome, only to find himself staying there.
Sancte Romane Ecclesiae Cardinalem Wojtyła.
Lo hanno chiamato di un paese lontano.
They called him the athlete of God. He often skied, rode, and mountain climbed, surprising the world by his strength and energy. His time spent as Pope was the third longest in history. His pontificate lasted 26 years. During that time, he became the leading moral authority for Catholics as well as non-Catholics. Nobody in the history of mankind has visited and been seen by more people. He met with every world leader from his time, visited almost every country in the world during his 104 trips abroad, and circled the world 29 times, the equivalent of 3 times the distance between the Earth and the Moon. The miners would like you to wear this helmet, so you can also be a miner of Katatai. We believe in God, Your Holiness. He was the Pope of human rights and the fight against violence. After the September 11th attacks on the Twin Towers, John Paul II called for avoidance of the idea it was a war between civilizations.
Padre di tutti, ascolta il grido unanime dei tuoi figli. Mai più la guerra, avventura senza ritorno, mai più la guerra, spirale di lutto e di violenza.
The late John Paul II became ill with a flu and a sore throat. During this time, the Gemelli Hospital in Rome became the center of Christianity. Pilgrims from all over the world accompanied him below his window. The Pope's sickness captured media attention worldwide. More than 1,000 radio and television stations followed his condition minute by minute. With much effort and sadness, this was the last time the Pope blessed the faithful in attendance. His window remained lit, but little by little, the light went out. The Vatican spokesman was visibly moved to tears, saying John Paul II had lost consciousness.
Papa lucido, extraordinariamente sereno, con la logica relativa alle difficoltà di respirare, l'immagine nuova. Difficoltà respiratoria, logica. Se ci sono altri aggiornamenti poi ci teniamo in contatto. Comunque, come sapete, la sala sarà sempre aperta. Grazie.
Romans and visitors filled St. Peter's Square to keep vigil, and counting the minutes, accompanied the Pope on his final voyage. On April 2nd, at 9:37 p.m. Roman time, the solemn bells of St. Andrew announced to the world that Karl Wojtylah's heart had stopped beating. The world paused for a moment to say goodbye to John Paul II. 3 million people came to Rome to pay their last respects to a person who had left his mark on their souls. Leaders across the world stopped talking about political disputes and prayed together for his soul. The pilgrims told the church there was no need for a beatification process because to them, the Pope was already a saint.
We now go to the best kept secret of Pope John Paul II revealed, his sacrifice.
Italian Vaticanist Andrea Tornielli has published unedited material in his latest book on John Paul II, titled Santo Subito, or Immediate Saint. In the book, he discloses never-before-heard testimonies from those who knew John Paul II best. Tornielli hopes to shed some light on what made John Paul II a powerful figure.
He spoke with God. You would take one look at him and you knew that he was a person who talked frequently with God.
Aside from praying with his lips, the book reveals that John Paul II would pray using his whole body, since he would often go on fasts and perform penance.
He would do it to suffer, and therefore have more suffering to offer Jesus Christ for the Church, for his pontificate, for humanity. John Paul II guided the Church for 27 years and gave witness to suffering like Christ for all humanity.
But what his biographers found is that this type of attention to his spiritual life didn't get in the way of the conflicts during his time. In fact, it's what brought him close to all people.
His attention to prayer, the spiritual and supernatural world, translated into a complete immersion into real life and the real world. Through his intense prayer life, he was able to embrace every person and to help each feel loved by God.
The book includes unedited episodes throughout his pontificate. For example, the times he would break protocol to visit with ill patients. On one occasion, he received a patient in his private chapel who wanted to see him, even though the patient had not made a formal request. John Paul II would also ask his secretaries to show him all the prayer requests he would receive.
They would leave notes on his table with the things people would ask him to pray for, and he prayed for every single one.
The book also captures some of the stories of those who say they received a miracle through the intercession of John Paul II. From medical miracles to conversions and solutions to problems. One of the most remarkable is the one involving French nun Marie-Simone Pierre. It's the miracle the postulator presented for John Paul II's future beatification.
It involved a French nun's cure of Parkinson's, the same disease the Pope had. The Pope also felt like he was locked in his body, since his body wasn't responsive. The cure was a miracle because Parkinson's is a degenerative disease and there's no cure for it.
Doctors have already declared the cure, quote, scientifically inexplicable. If theologians and cardinals at the Vatican agree, the Pope could beatify John Paul II next fall.
We now go to Pope John Paul II funeral, the year 2005.
April 8, 2005. Shortly before the start of the solemn funeral mass for John Paul II, his body was placed inside a coffin made of cypress wood. His face was covered by Monsignor Stanislaw Żywiec, his personal secretary, and by Bishop Piero Marini, the Pontifical Master of Ceremonies, while a brief prayer was read. May his face, now hidden from our sight, contemplate your beauty, Lord. Then a Latin text was read outlining his life and pontificate.
The pontificate of John Paul II was one of the longest in the history of the Church. Many changes of various kinds were experienced during that time. They included the fall of several communist regimes, events to which he himself contributed. He undertook many trips to various nations in order to announce the gospel. His love for young people led him to create the World Youth Days, bringing together millions of young people from all over the world. He successfully promoted dialogue with Jews and with representatives of other religions, occasionally calling them to come together, especially in Assisi, to pray for peace.
The document was signed by those present, enclosed in a metal tube, and placed inside the coffin. On the day of the funeral, the open space in front of St. Peter's looked like a meeting of the United Nations. The most powerful men and women in the world were there, as well as representatives of different religions, while delegates from all the Christian churches stood around the coffin. An open Bible had been placed on the coffin. The wind blew the pages back and forth before a powerful gust closed the book altogether. The red vestments of the concelebrating cardinals billowed and flapped in the wind. It was as though the Holy Spirit, who'd given the Church John Paul II in the first place, now blew on those called to elect his successor. Presidents and former presidents of the United States of America found themselves beside leaders from Muslim countries. Men and women of different and often conflicting faiths sat in silence before the coffin of John Paul II and listened to the voice of the wind. It was a minor miracle that would have appealed to Karol Wojtyła. Over 300,000 people packed the square, while hundreds of millions more watched and listened on radios, television, and internet. The funeral mass was celebrated by 160 cardinals and was presided over by the Dean of the Sacred College, Joseph Ratzinger. A great silence fell over St. Peter's Square when
was beatified in St. Peter's Square on the 1st of May, year 2011 by Pope Benedict XVI. Now we go to John Paul II's A Lasting Memory.
On June 10, 2005, an announcement was made at a diocesan congress of families in Rome that triggered a roar of applause throughout the assembly. 18 days later, on June 28th, the cause of beatification and canonization of John Paul II was officially opened in the Basilica of St. John Lateran during the first Vespers of the Solemnity of the Apostles Peter and Paul. The first phase of the process of beatification began at this diocesan level. 2 years later, also in Rome, the second phase began, devoted to the development of the Positio, or summary of documentation, of the heroic virtue of Karol Wojtyła. The document comprised 2,500 pages of evidence. The Positio is now up for review and comment by a commission of 8 theologians, along with the general promoter of the faith. Only when all of these stages are complete and resulting in a positive outcome can Pope Benedict express his own opinion and order the promulgation of the decree of the heroic virtue of John Paul II, thereby proclaiming him venerable. At this point, all public statements are made by Monsignor Slavomir Oder, the postulator of the cause, so that the cause of beatification and canonization of John Paul II advances in a rigorous manner according to the traditional canonical processes. For friend and then personal secretary to John Paul II, Cardinal Stanislav Dziwisz, the Archbishop of Krakow, the wait now might not be for very long.
Now we go to the beatification of Pope John Paul II.
Nos, vota fratris nostri, Augustini Cardinalis Valini, vicari nostri pro Romana Diocesi, nec non plurimorum aliorum fratum in episcopato, multorumque Christi fidelium explentes, de congregationis de causi sanctorum consulto, auctoritate nostra apostolica, facultatem facimus, ut venerabilis servus Dei Johannes Paulus secundus Papa, beati nomine in postrum appelletur, iusque festum dia altera et 20 Octobris in locis et modis juris statutis quotanis celebrare possit, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
John Paul II was finally canonized saint the 27th of April, year 2014. John Paul II, the Great.
Just an ordinary man who said yes to a plan of infinite, extraordinary love. a world torn by war, an actor destined for a role in the drama of our times. A priest he became and the world would change. He stood up for truth amidst the lies. Then unexpected came the name, a new hope. He stepped forth and with power he proclaimed, "Be not afraid. Open wide your hearts to the love and the life that is Christ. Come, let us feel peace in this world. Let us build a civilization of love." Teacher, leader, servant, friend, he brings peace, reaches out his hand, asking forgiveness for the wrongs those in the church had done. He exchanged love for hate, standing at the prison gate. He forgave his assassin's crime. He travels the earth from sea to sea with the message of hope for you and me. Will we answer the call? Be a light in the dark, as he assures us all to be not afraid. Open wide your hearts to the love and the life that is Christ. Come, let us build peace in this world. Let us build a civilization of love. To the young he gives hope, and to the old he gives purpose. The light of Christ in his eyes. To the sick he gives comfort, and the hurt he makes whole. John Paul II, you live on, you live on. Be not afraid. Open wide your hearts to the love and the life that is Christ. That is Christ. Come, let us build peace in this world. Let us build a civilization of
Jean-Paul II, he loves you. Jean-Paul II, he loves you.
Pope John Paul II, we learn from you the gift of peace. We learn from you that suffering is our offering, that every life is a gift. Faith is demanding, but we must never be afraid, even if the forces of darkness seems to prevail. Those who believe in God know that evil does not have the final saying. We thank you, John Paul II. You gave us hope. You strengthened our faith. You inflame our hearts to love. Thank you, Pope John Paul II. Truly, we end by telling you with all our hearts, Saint John Paul II, we love you.